So we've titled this workshop, Getting Off the Ground, Starting a Research Lab in Academia. This event was developed in collaboration with the Perform Center and graduate student members of a newly established Student Scientific Events Subcommittee. So this is our first event, and so because of that, it's especially nice to see how much interest there was in a workshop such as this, so I'm very glad that we can make this happen. So on behalf of the Perform Center and our student committee, I'd like to thank our faculty panelists for agreeing to share their knowledge and experience with us, and everyone in the audience for joining us today. The student subcommittee includes Concordia graduate students affiliated with Perform Center and working in different labs and across different departments. As a brief introduction, so my name is Oren Weiner. I'm a PhD student in the clinical psychology program. Just briefly about my research, it's supervised by Dr. Tan Dang Vu in the sleep lab, where I study brain oscillations during sleep and associations with memory. So the other panelists, or the other committee members, are going to give a brief introduction before we introduce our panel speakers. So I will turn things over to Fadi, who is the current chair of our subcommittee, and he will take things from there.
Hi, thank you, Oren. And thanks for the speakers. My name is Fadi, and I'm completing a Master of Science in the Department of Biology under the supervision of Dr. Peter Darlington. Now I think Laurent will introduce himself.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm Laurent. I'm currently a master's student in the Department of Health Kinesiology and Applied Physiology. So I'm studying obesity. So I guess we'll start. So as graduate students, many of us dream to have a career in academia. So to start our own labs. So however, the path towards this goal seems to be a little rocky or obscure. There are many unanswered questions in our minds, and there are many aspects of the academic career that we would like to further explore and understand. In other words, this is essentially the rationale behind this event. Luckily for us, today we will have the opportunity to ask distinguished researchers at Concordia about their journey to establish themselves as researchers and their labs, and also the challenges that they faced along the way. So our goal for today is to help students at different stages of their academic journey and to clarify certain aspects related to starting and managing a lab in different fields of science. So in order to do so, we have a panel of questions separated into 4 teams, which will be discussed for 20 minutes, more or less. So during these 20 minutes, questions will be asked to all speakers to answer them from their perspective, considering that they're from different departments, they have different fields of expertise, and they have different types of lab as well. So at the end, we will have a short conclusion and a Q&A session with questions from the audience. Therefore, we will have to be mindful of the time as we go. So for you all, for our speakers, so I'm sorry in advance, you may be interrupted if we go over the time. So, and also with regards to questions, if any of you in the audience have a question, you can ask it whenever it comes to your mind, and you do not need to wait until the end in order to do so. Therefore, we hope that you will appreciate our first event. So without further ado, let's introduce our speakers. So we are delighted and honored today to have here with us a diverse panel of speakers, which is composed of Dr. Habib Ben Ali, Dr. Linda Boysch, Dr. Maris Fortin, Dr. Christophe Grova, Dr. Miela Lordanova, and last but not least, Dr. Alyssa Pickney. So our speakers were approached about joining this event because they represent diversity across departments, lab types, wet versus dry lab, and their stages in their career, early versus mid-late career. So before getting into the panel discussion, we'd like to start by letting our speakers briefly introduce themselves. So let's start with Dr. Ben Ali.
Dr. Ben Ali, sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. So thank you very much for this invitation. I'm saying that I am the older guy in this panel, so, and maybe I have more years of research depending on my age only. So I am the scientific director of the Perform Center and the NSERC Research Chair in Bioimaging and Healthy Aging. I am also a professor at the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Concordia. and my scientific background start in mathematics, then moved to neuroimaging and cognitive neuroscience during this last 20 years.
All right, so now let's head over to Dr. Linda Boyce to introduce herself.
Hi, well, thank you for inviting me to this event. So my name is Linda Boy. I am associate professor in the psychology department. I started my career in the Netherlands by graduate training in clinical psychology, and then I got a postdoc in McGill's psychiatry department, and now just at Concordia University in the Department of Psychology. I'm a holder of a Concordia University research chair in eating disorders and also researcher at St. Justine Hospital. And my research is on the role of the early environment on brain development and risk for mental health problems, and particularly eating disorders.
All right, thank you for your introduction. All right, so I was told that Maryse Fortin is currently missing, so we will go directly towards Dr. Grova.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks a lot for the invitation. So my name is Christophe Grova. I'm associate professor in the Department of Physics at Concordia and also a researcher at the Perform Center. I am also affiliated to the Biomedical Engineering Department of McGill University. And I am at the Neuro today because we are setting up an experiment over there right now. So my training is really from the beginning in biomedical engineering. I think I come from probably the first school in France who did a bachelor program in biomedical engineering that's starting several years ago already. My activity of research is mainly according to around neuroimaging, like combining different modalities to study the brain, looking at electrophysiology, looking at the hemodynamic signal in MRI, but also EEG and different devices like that. So I started in Concordia about 5 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we would like to hear from Dr. Lordanova.
Hi, I'm Mihaela Yordanova. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and a member of the CSBN. I did my PhD at the University of New South Wales in Australia, and subsequently I moved to the UK and then to the States before I landed in Canada. My research focuses on the neurobiological mechanisms of learning and memory, and we use complex behavioral designs in animal models to look how the brain learns and how we can manipulate specific brain cells or brain areas and pathways and see how that in turn affects learning and behavior.
Thank you so much. So now, last but not least, Dr. Alyssa Pickney.
Hi, thank you for the invite, by the way. So I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biology, and I'm also a Tier 2 Concordia Research Chair in the area of cancer cell biology. So I did my PhD at the University of Calgary, where I actually studied tissue morphogenesis. And then I did my postdoc work with Dr. Glotzer at the Institute of Molecular Pathology in Vienna, Austria, where I got interested in human cell division. And from there, that kind of spawned my research in my own lab, which really looks at both mechanisms regulating cell division and migration. And I do this both from a fundamental perspective, but also how these mechanisms go awry in cancers. And a lot of my more recent collaboration have taken me into the direction of exploring therapies for the diagnostic and treatment of cancer.
All right, thank you. So now we will move on to the first theme of our event today, which is named Establishing Your Lab and Finances. So in this theme, we will talk about starting a lab and the challenges that our researchers faced when they started their lab and in their respective departments. So the first question will be directed towards Dr. Benali. So for this question, I want you to think back to the good old days when you just started to finish your graduate studies or postdoctoral studies, and you recently joined a department as a new faculty member. So with that in mind, my question is the following. When when you were taking those first few steps toward building a research lab, what were your initial steps or consideration needed to establish yourself as a researcher once you joined the department? So for example, just to direct a little bit your answers, what were your first priorities? What did university need from you and vice versa? Or what did you need to have in place in order for your lab to open?
Okay, so my trajectory was a little bit special because I was never decided to do research in cognitive neuroscience or in neuroscience in general, because I come from mathematics, and when I did mathematics, I did a pure mathematics, topology, geometry. So, and when I finished my PhD in mathematics, I realized that I really want to make some application to develop and to apply the mathematics in some area, and health becomes to me something that I targeted. So this is my first focus. I really target the health, starting with this mathematics. So I went to the Institute of Health in France, and I started doing my research at the Institute of Health as a researcher. So all what I can say is that moving from the Department of Mathematics at Université de Rennes in Britain and in France to the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, working with a medical doctor, it's a huge, really huge thing for me at that time, because I was, it was not the problem of developing a research program, but developing a language. Because I moved from the environment of mathematician to the environment of medical doctor. So how I can talk to the medical doctor developing the research program. So I think that the lesson that I can share with you is that a priority of a young researcher is to establish a well-focused project and avoid dispersion in research, because it was really something that it helped me a lot to be focused on one research program. Then from this research program that I established at that time, which was in detecting microcalcification in breast cancer. So I developed mathematics doing this. This kind of research becomes a little bit more known because GE company implement this research program on their own program of research in breast cancer. So anyway, focusing on this, so I target funding a program for my main research program. And I was really in a collaborative network who helped me to establish my research program. So this is very important aspect of a young researcher, having this environment of network who help to establish the research. So all what I can say is that the university will help you in the beginning to establish your lab, but we will evaluate you very quickly. So it's therefore necessary to target your highest priorities. For instance, like number of students, what kind of equipment you need, and what kind of space you need at the beginning. But again, you should be really focused on one or two topics to really develop your research program at the beginning. You can enlarge your research program a little bit later, but at the beginning, this is my recommendation that I can come with for the young researcher or a young professor at the university.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your answer. So now we will move on to Dr. Boyd.
Yeah, regarding like I agree for a big part. It's a bit similar what was just said. I think as well, like it's important to be focus? Well, first of all, it's important that to have a plan actually, because there's a lot of different things to deal with at the same time. So to really make a kind of clear plan, what is the priority for now? And I agree with what said, like maybe not like right away too many different projects. As a new, principal investigator, what I experienced, like it was, not too hard to find different connections and to be involved in many different, projects and things. But it's also to really think about what is your focus, what is like the research line that you as a researcher will be developing. And then, as Habib said, there's, there's other ways later on to expand, to do more, but to have like a clear plan. And to not to take up like too many different things at the same time, because then you can maybe already spread yourself too thin, like right at the beginning.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we'll move to towards Dr. Grova.
Okay, yes. So me, it's a little bit like the very first start is so I did my PhD in France. So when I was in postdoc here, like the first intention was to go back to France. I tried at the National Health Institute where Habib is, and that's at the same time that I got the position at McGill. So that was a bit new for me because in research in France, you are mainly joining a team. So which means all the environment of the team is there. It's not you who are handling how to buy computers, how to set up your lab. Like you are joining a team and you're joining a project. So I was more expecting that than being my own boss in a way and starting really to do everything by myself in the lab. And so fortunately, I got good advice from people around me to do that. The other thing that was important, we heard that, and given to me, it was at McGill at the Montreal Neurologic Institute, was a clear fight for spaces. That was a huge problem over there. Like just to tell you the truth, the first place they proposed me was a place that was closed from a pathological department that no one entered there since the 40s. So was a bit strange. Finally, we got a very nice space in a computer science office, and because we're doing computer stuff. And the other thing that's important when you start up in terms of finance, we have this program here in Canada, which is called the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, and usually most of the positions are coming with that. So it's also trying to set up what you need as equipment. So for me, it was mainly computers, but not only, because we set up a new device. And so that allows you to find a space and to allow some renovation of that space and really to set up your lab. And it ended up very well at the end, but that's really the important time to negotiate that. I would say like between the time you get your first offer and before you sign, that's really the crucial time where you have to negotiate a bit those things. So what is your vision? You don't have the same needs. If you need a wet lab, or if you just need few computers, and like try to identify what you need to start with, probably few students, and those opportunities like CFI are giving the opportunity to renovate and to organize your lab to start, and that's really probably the first work to be done. And finally, I was really lucky at the beginning to have an excellent mentor to guide me through the first grant submission. And that's I agree with everything that was said before, that we should remain focused, try to find our own niche. And like having good mentors on how to write grant, like when you're a postdoc, you don't learn how to write a grant, which is different than writing a research paper. And that's also something you need good help to do at the beginning, and that's okay for me.
All right, thank you for your advices. So now we will go to Dr. Fortin. So if you could introduce yourself, since you were missing at the beginning before answering the question, that would be lovely.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Sorry for joining late. I had a little issue this morning that I had to deal with. So yeah, my name is Dr. Fortin. I'm a new faculty, so this is interesting. I'm bringing probably a new perspective then, because I'm very new. I got hired. I started July last year. So this process of getting hired is very still fresh in my memory. So I'm working in the HCAP department, so the Health Kinesiology and Applied Physiology. And my research is focusing a lot on the spine. I use imaging to look at what happens specifically to the musculature in different pathologies, so neck pain, back pain. I can use MRI and ultrasound to kind of quantify the morphology and the function, and also look at the effect of exercise and what happens to these muscles that have shown degeneration with these pathology. So what kind of exercise is best to try to get these muscles better and get people a better quality of life. So in a nutshell, that's what my research field is. So in terms of what to think at the beginning, so I can talk about the negotiation factor, and when I had to negotiate my startup funds, I had to provide right away a list of equipment that I thought I would need in my lab. So right away, you really have to think about all these steps, and then you have to go through the negotiation with the dean of the faculty. So that went relatively well on my side. And then also in terms of labs, so it's always a big issue to find lab space I think in any department and any university. So I was able to get a lab space that was under construction last semester, and then with the whole COVID, as you can imagine, things got shut down. But interesting thing to think about, I had to give a plan as to how I wanted to design my lab space. Dr. Grova said, do I need a wet space, a dry space? So for me, I need lab equipment, like a computer screen where I can do imaging analysis. And then I divided my lab into two different sections. So one section for imaging analysis, one section for where I can have an ultrasound machine and a therapy table, where I can do little training with my students, etc. So really try to think about, what space you need, how much space you need. So the more prepared you are, the better idea you have in your head of what you're going to need, and the better you can give that information to university, and they can try to, cross fingers, give you that space. But thinking about, whether you want a sink or how many plugs you need to put your computers, and all these, details come into to play. And sometimes you don't, it's good to have somebody helping you through the process. So that's it. That's what I can add so far to this topic, I think.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. So now we would like to hear from Dr. Lordanova.
Hi. So I guess the first thing that I would say is you need to know where you're planning to go. So depending on the country, there's different mechanisms to get started. If you're going to the States, then a big part of starting will be given by your startup, and that will give you time to set up to buy your equipment. This is very different to the way this works in Canada, where you will probably have to negotiate something that others have talked about here, which is CFI funds. So the bottom line is all of these details is not something you're going to remember now, but you need to do your research before you actually decide where you want to move or where you're actually going. So I think that's the number one thing that I would say. And I think that goes for everything really. It includes how you're going to write your grants, what you're going to target, what are the mechanisms? The mechanisms are different in Canada to really the States. The States is really based on NIH, whereas here we have very separate funding that you will tap into when you first start, basic research versus health-related funds. So the other thing that I would say is once you know where you're going, it's very important to get to know how your institution is structured, who you need to speak to get things to move forward. So if you need startup funds to be released, then you need to know who to talk to get those released. How to purchase things, you need to know people in purchasing. I was really lucky to have Isabelle Bouvier, who was the administrator of the CSBN when I started, and she knew everyone at Concordia. So that helped me put all the moving pieces together to get going. If you're going to get lab renovations, then chances are you'll need to know who to speak to at facilities management. So there's really this kind of very complex organism that is, developing and growing as you're starting your own lab. And if there isn't a particular administrator you can speak to your chair, and they'll be able to guide you through the process. In terms of research, one of the things that I have learned, and I've seen people fail a little bit in this regard is when we start our own labs, we really want to ask the big, really exciting questions because finally we have an opportunity to be independent. And what I would say here is hold on to those for a little bit later. Start off with something that is simple, that is sure to work, because you want to show the world that you can do this. And as you're getting in students, you want your students to be able to be productive early on because that's going to make them really motivated. So start with the simple and move towards the more complex ideas later so that you don't lose motivation, your students don't lose motivation. And I think the same thing goes with grants. Start with the grants that you're more likely to get as opposed to for something that is going to give you a ton of money, but it's a lot more difficult to get because you could lose your momentum and you can feel disheartened because it is hard to get funded. I think these were the main points that I wanted to cover.
Perfect, thank you. So now we will move to Dr. Pickney.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it's already been said. I think for me, the biggest thing was, again, I have a very expensive research program. The majority of my work is done on a bench on the wet lab. So I needed to get funding immediately, and the startup funds from the university were simply not enough to really support that research. So for me, getting funding was an absolute priority. So I think, as Mihaela actually mentioned, getting that institutional support to help you get that funding is really important. So it is good to do that homework and find out that support exists. I think nowadays the funding success rates are so low that you do have to put in more applications than you might have had to do, say, 10 years ago when I started my lab. It's unfortunate. It's a position we're in Canada right now, but I think it's global. I think many countries have the same issue. So I think just be prepared to do a lot of writing in that first year to get that funding. The other issue is getting students. You need hands to help you out right away. Some people may go toward getting a technician. Other people may just bring in students. It's a cost balance thing, perhaps. But it's also, you need hands to get that wet lab work going. So I couldn't do it by myself. And getting them in sooner than later was really important. So what I did was I took the model that my postdoc lab had set up. We actually did a move during my postdoc, and that helped me a lot because I could see the steps that were required in order to getting the reagents and the equipment and everything up and running. And the last thing was just the big items, the big ticket items, infrastructure. Like I needed a microscope that Concordia didn't have. So how was I going to get it? That had to come from CFI funding. And until that came through, I had to go off-site and go to another university. So know your local environment and where you could get that infrastructure if you can't get it yourself at the home institution. So that's all I'll say for that.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Pickney. So now I guess that answers our first question. So we will move to the second question of this team, which will be directed first to Dr. Bush. So now we will talk about the challenges that you guys have faced. So what if any kind of financial, institutional, or administrative barriers did you face and overcome while trying to establish yourself in your laboratory? Were there any particular surprising challenges that you had to overcome during this process? So for example, again, purchasing expensive pieces of equipment or to get your project research started, managing, acquiring, allocating your finances, which I guess it requires some type of knowledge in business and finance, which you probably had to learn on the go. So I guess we will start with that.
Well, some of the aspects of challenges, I think they tap in the things that I just mentioned. I think indeed, like knowing who to talk to. The university is a big, big institution. Knowing like who to go. Some of the challenges that I, from my own research experience, from my own research program experience, is that because given my research from the start was in multiple institutions, and every university of every institution has their own kind of way of working. So you have to navigate basically through different systems and to also find the best way of dealing with some of these challenges. As well, in terms of like purchasing, or if I think about like my lab renovation at Concordia, I do mainly dry lab work, but there are some aspects, that you may could consider as well as more like wet lab. So even like things, let's say like you want to have like a sink and a kind of like a mini wet lab counter in your lab, knowing the rules. Okay, what do you need? What are the safety requirements according to the the Concordia system and so on. So really, kind of knowing like who to talk to, and as well, what's the best way of dealing this financially as well. I think in grad school and as well in postdoc, we're learning a lot of different research skills and very crucial research skills. But as a faculty member, you're also dealing with things that are never taught, and as well, learning how to manage in terms like finance or even like HR related stuff as well. How to pick the best candidate as well for example, as a research coordinator or as well as students. Another challenge I could think of when I started, during my postdoc, I collected a lot of data. At the time that I started as a principal investigator, there was still a lot of data that I had to write up that came out of my postdoc. So to really as well manage your time and like focusing on like your new stuff, but also finalize all the work that was done during my postdoc to make sure as well that you get the output that was expected.
All right, thank you so much. So now we would like to hear from Dr. Fortin.
Yeah. Okay. So something that I could add to that, for example, a concrete example, when I had to first buy my first piece of equipment is actually an equipment that I bought used, because it's a specific training machine that if you buy new is very expensive. So I was able to find it a used piece of equipment. But in the university, if you want to buy any kind of piece of equipment, for example, you have to provide more than one quote. So those are things that you have to think about, know where to send them, and then I had to think about bringing somebody over to give training for that piece of equipment to my students that we're going to work with. And that specific person, there was nobody in Canada that could do the training, so I had to invite somebody from the US to come and do the training. So when you have to pay somebody that comes from the US, then the payroll system is different. So I had a bit of a back and forth on that, but just navigating all these steps can be tricky sometimes. So as some other speakers have said, you really need to know who to contact with and ask for help if you need to. Yeah.
All right, thank you for your input. So now we'll move to Dr. Grova.
Okay, so yeah, it was a bit the same. Among the challenge, I think the first things was to get the first students and the research going. So for me, in terms of acquisition, like at that time I was in McGill, one of the system I was using was magnetoencephalography, which was not in McGill yet, but was at University of Montreal in the Department of Psychology. So I started moving around to work over there. And for my first equipment grant, I was about to request a system called near-infrared spectroscopy. And so through collaboration, I started getting my very first data, first at Saint Justine and then at Institut Geriatrie. So there was a lot of move around to get the first data while setting up the lab to get my own system. But we managed, especially through the MEG program, we managed to make it through very quite nicely. Another challenge I would say at the beginning is when you get your first students, which to me were mainly international students who got, and at that time it was very difficult for international students to find funding in Canada. There was almost no possibility. And so at the time when my startup went over and the time I got the new grant, there was a bit of a stress, like knowing that if I would be able to have them there. Fortunately, thanks to funds like NSERC and things like that, it ended up well, but there was some challenge to face from the beginning. And finally, the space, like I was really sharing space at the beginning for them. And so it took a good 2 years to get everything set up with a very nice lab, and everybody was happy. The first time, like the challenge were over there. A last comment, perhaps, which is more specific to those doing computer science. We're doing advanced medical image processing. And so I didn't want that all my students were like a Linux geek who would play with their computer alone and install whatever they want, and we would have a completely unique configurations that no one could reproduce. And so we were lucky. I was using at that time the model that was used at the Montreal Brain Imaging Center, which was that every new computer would start belonging to a cluster and would be managed by one or two IT, and that all system would be installed and configured exactly the same way with exactly the same software. And that was very useful to get things running. So you don't spend hours in terms of that time. There were still compilation issues, installation. So you don't spend hours on those things for those softwares. And that was very useful to get them to get professional. And actually, that's the person I hired at Perform when I started to have our first machine set up. And now we have someone specifically at Perform who's handling that. And that's a system that we are providing at Perform. Like we have a cluster of computer, or any new computer could belong to that. That's what I try to set up in the committee I was, so that for people doing imaging, we can all start with a similar environment. It's not as much as broadly used, I would say, as the big, but it's getting there. And I think we're progressing in that direction to help people to have the same environment when they do programmation in imaging.
All right, thank you. So now I would like to ask Dr. Lourdernova to answer this question as well.
Yeah, I guess I only have a couple of things to add here. So when it comes to facing challenges, I think one of the first things to think about is, as a strategy, is to talk to people in the department that you join, speak to your chair, also speak to other people who have recently started. They'll be able to tell you about specifics that they have faced. All of us have had different and unique challenges, and they may be or may not be at all what you might face. So really the best way is just to talk to individuals, and they'll be able to provide answers. Talk to many individuals. Another thing that people often do is try and find a mentor. My philosophy here is that there is no one mentor for everything. And I think the way you should be thinking about finding a mentor is a mentor to help you write a grant, or a mentor to help you in thinking how you should recruit, or how you should build your lab, or, basically a mentor who can help you with individual aspects of what it is that you need to do, as opposed to one person who mentors you in everything. I don't think that works. And really one of the main challenges, I think, that can be really hard to solve for a long, long time when starting out is recruitment. There are many components that can influence your success in recruitment, but your success in recruitment is fundamental to your success as a PI. So being able to hire, great students, great postdocs, great research assistants is not just about them being very bright, but also it's about fit. And all of these components come together in a way that is hard to predict. Again, what I would suggest is talking to people, and not only people who have recently recruited or people who are more established, to find out how they do it, but also don't hesitate to spend the time speaking to the people you're thinking about recruiting. Spend more time with them, get to know them a little bit better, and definitely speak to their previous mentors to get a better sense, for the kind of individual who will join your lab. And for sure, you need to get to know yourself in the kind of mentor you want to be, and that might change across the years. And that could change who you want to recruit. You need to know what you can work with, what you can't work with. Are you a micromanager, or you do the opposite? And depending on who you are, different individuals will work better with you in your team. And these are things that no one can provide answers for you. These are things that you will know yourself. You need to look into yourself to find out who you are, and then go from there.
All right, thank you so much. So now I would like to hear from Dr. Pickney.
So again, I think a lot has already been said, but I would reiterate what was just most recently said about finding those people that can help you navigate the institutions. I think for me, it was that was what I would consider one of the surprises. I wasn't expecting to have such a challenge in understanding and just figuring out the different processes and policies that are in place and how to navigate those different policies. And in the end, just talking to people and figuring out who those key people were to help you through those and help you to navigate those were the best way to do it. And I agree that you need mentors for very different things. So the same person that helps you navigate a purchase isn't going to be the person who helps you write a grant. The other challenge I faced was also the student recruitment. So I think, again, everything was said already in a really great way, but just to reiterate that I've changed a lot as a PI, and the people that I chose in the beginning were when I was more hands-on in the lab and where I may have had a tendency to be more micromanaging. And so and perhaps the HQP or the trainees were a little more junior, and that they have transitioned over time, as I have, to being more independent. And now the type of people I take in my lab have to have that independence because I'm not in there to do that anymore. And I've learned definitely to be more hands-off in my approach. So I've changed a lot. And so my approach to recruitment has also changed a lot. But there's also this reputation where people just don't know who you are in the beginning. So it's word of mouth and trying to reach out to the people in your field and let them know that you're looking and that, you know, what kind of projects you might have to offer, and using that word of mouth to advertise yourself.
Sorry, I was on mute. So, Dr. Benali, do you have anything to add to this? Hello?
Sorry, Dr. Benali, you're muted.
Sorry. So I said that I want to add 2 points. The first one is I want really to reassure the young researcher first. So the institution, when they recruit the researcher, they provide them with financial support. And I would like to add, not too much from my point of view, but still, they give them support. And of course, they give them also space, usually to share with other people. So not too much in this case. So it's very important to be clear on your research program, what you want to do to go in a more optimal way to implement your lab and your research program. But this is possible. From my point of view, the difficulty encountered by the young researcher is to really establish the research network where I get the right information, which people. So this is really difficult for them. So that's why I think that the institution and the environment should give them this kind of support. So I think that at the Perform Center, when we start working with a researcher or young researcher, we give them this kind of support, because I think this is the main important point that the researcher or young researcher need. And at the same time, I know that the young researchers are asked by their department to participate, to be part of the community. So the challenge is how I can build this research network, how I can build my lab, and how I can also participate to the life of the department. So all of this takes time, and how I can manage all my time. And this is maybe a challenge of the young researcher. So my recommendation is to be focused on the research program. I come back to my initial point. And second is to, yes, of course, you have to participate to the life of your community to get information for your research program, or to get information to establish your lab. So again, with the focus, it's not participating to the community, doing a lot of things who are completely far from your research program, because this is a huge thing to manage when you are a young researcher.
All All right, thank you, Dr. Benani. So thank you all for your valuable answers. So that is all for me now, and I will let my colleague Fadi take over for the second team of this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, Laurent.
And thank you for your valuable answers. These were like great answers. We heard a lot of interesting points, actually, that were like hinting on the next themes, especially my theme, which will be the students and lab staff. So this is actually an interesting theme, I think, for all undergraduate and new graduate students, or at least for me, it's very interesting. So now I think we're going to talk about the lab staff and the students from recruiting to training to managing. And our first question will be directed to Dr. Fortin. So Dr. Fortin, in terms of managing a lab and a research group, working to maintain motivation, cohesion, and engagement, and team spirit, as well as managing the conflicts and arguments that may arise among your group, is a challenge. Our question is, in the course of establishing your lab, how did you go about finding, recruiting, and training students, and has your supervision style changed as your lab and research program continued to grow?
Okay. So something that maybe wasn't clear from the beginning is that one advantage for me was that I was a researcher at Perform before I got my position as a faculty. So it was an advantage in the sense that I already knew, how to apply for ethics and how things work generally in Concordia. So it really helped me at the beginning navigate some of these aspects. Definitely, like at Perform, I was familiar with all the equipment there, so that was a great advantage. And also, interestingly, I'm in the department where I did my undergrad myself. So I actually know some of the faculty that are there taught me, right? So this is a very, it's a go back to family in a sense. So, I was able to talk with some people and really help me at the beginning. And in terms of recruiting students, what I was able to do is, I knew I got that position, let's say, I think it was in sometime in the winter, by the time I do the negotiation and everything. I was able to go and talk in some classroom to some students, telling them, hey, I'm going to be starting my program next year. This is my research. If any of you would be interested to work with me, then, please send me an email. So I was able to already kind of advertise that I was coming, and I was able to recruit. Right away when I started in September last year, I already had 3 graduate students, and I already worked with 4 undergrad students in my department doing independent research studies with them. So they already did a 3-credit class with me where they got research experience. So, I was already in contact with 7 students when I started. So I had my hands-on already a little bit in the department. So that really helped me out because right away when I started, I had 1 PhD student that was actually international. So this student contacted me right after I knew that I got the position, and it was very interesting because she did her master's directly aligned with what I do. So I was able to get her, and we were able to get funding through the department. So that was very interesting to get a PhD student right away. And it was actually our PhD program in our department. That was the first year that we started with PhD students because the PhD program was new and was opening last year. So it was the first year that we were welcoming PhD students. So it was really great for me to be able to welcome a PhD student right away. So I think that in terms of challenging and, what we conflict resolution and everything, I think that as a supervisor, you have to be really open and direct as to what do you expect from your students and what do they expect from you as well as their supervisor. To me, I like to, set clear deadlines and be very open, you know, if something I do doesn't work, then you tell me, and vice versa, because I don't want things to drag on. So this is, you know, the approach that I've been using so far, and it's working well. So I think that it's a two-way relationship, and it needs to be open on both ends. So that's my approach.
Yeah, it's always like I don't know, like this problem is always happening. Thank you very much for your answer. And now we would like to hear from Dr. Grova.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of recruitment, I think what's very important is to develop your strategies and your, I would say, recruitment network. So I can say a little bit my experience, as I say, like when I started in McGill, the biomedical engineering department at McGill is a graduate program only. So we had absolutely no access to undergrad students, which is quite different from where I am now in physics at Concordia. And I would say that then my strategy that I continue to have is to, like, when you start with a student in PhD, it's a long time commitment. So you want to make sure like that everything goes well and that you can work together. So having like a short internship before was always better to know the persons. And to me, what happens most of the time is one system that I'm using a lot is people who are doing, it's a lot in France, but not only in France, it's people who are graduating typically from an engineer program. In France, in engineering program, they need to do a 6 months internship to graduate. And then they could start, depending, either on master or sometimes it's a master equivalent, so they start directly in PhD. And but at least you add them for a good 6 months, and so that the student knows the supervisor, you know the student, so then it's way easier to decide, okay, we will continue. And I've been recruited a lot of students like that. The other thing that I've been advised at the beginning is more to start with master students than PhD, just to make sure, and also for your career at the beginning, because it means you will have your first graduated student soon, which is good to show that you're able to graduate students. And to me, that's what happened. And like the 3 first graduate masters stayed and all had their PhD, which was cool. And so that's, yeah. So I have my network, for instance, of either colleagues from everywhere in the world or French engineer school who are sending me regularly, oh, we have these interns who would like, do you want to propose a project for 3 months? What's interesting is that sometimes you have internships that are not the standard, like summertime. Like I have internship during the winter with some of them, which was nice because you don't have so many students over there. And now in physics, I'm using a lot either the co-op or the honors project or like the different systems that have been offered to undergrads. Now I will start with capstone in engineering, just to learn more the students, and so I kept a few of them as graduate students from physics like that. But that was mainly my own strategy. But usually before committing, I did few times, but usually before committing for a PhD, I started to find a way to have that. In terms of the overall management of the lab, I think things started making a real difference for me also when I started being able to recruit postdoc. So to make really a more like sub-team groups, like making people working in sub-teams. And something that has been very important for me since the beginning in biomedical, I always, with my colleagues who are MDs, I always make like small teams, like pairs. Like most of my fellows are working with a neurologist, with an MD, so they would have both knowledge. To speak, like they are not speaking only the engineer language, they could speak the medical language as well. So that's important also and I think that creates a nice multidisciplinary framework in the lab.
Right, and actually it's a very interesting point, this distinction between the master's, PhD, and postdoc point that you pointed to. It's actually great. My next question, or the same question, will be directed to Dr. Iordanova. Actually, in your answer to question 2 in theme 1, you hinted at that. We would like to hear more from you about that, and probably if you can just like give us some information about how it seems like internationally or outside of Canada.
Okay, all right. So I'll start off firstly with, I'm going to break it down in terms of recruitment and training. So Dr. Grover already mentioned how to go about recruitment when you're not in a department that has an undergraduate program. So what I will do is address when you are in a department that has an undergraduate program. So one of the things that I think early on is really helpful is indeed to reach out internally. So through teaching, you can get people excited about your research. Also, it's a good way to get people involved, and this came up before, where you can have them come in the lab, you can see how they work, whether they get excited about the research that you do, whether you can work well together. It's a two-way process. Both of you need to be happy with being in that environment. So that works well. And as you build your profile, then great students will flock to you. And I feel that later it's not as much of a concern once your name is out there as an independent researcher. Students will know who you are. So yeah, absolutely, your network is important, but don't worry so much about this down the line. And being able to recruit people internationally is really great. That's how I've recruited postdocs. It's worked really well for me, but you need to know the labs that they come from. But you know, there are many different strategies when it comes to this, and I think ultimately you will find what works for you because you have your own individual profile. Maybe a network will work great for you, maybe it won't. Maybe you'll go more internally, maybe you will be more focused on the city where you are. I think you have to explore these things on an individual basis. There's no one answer that is correct, and I think that's the case for any of the questions that you're asking. In terms of training, one thing that I will emphasize that I think is really key and really is overarching is the fact that you have to train the individual. There is no one way to do this where, like you can be open, you can communicate expectations, you can be a micromanager, you can be many things, but ultimately none of that is going to work if you're not training the individual. You need to get to know each person in your lab, and you need to see maybe one person needs to be micromanaged. They need a lot more input. Maybe that will come from you. Maybe that will come from a postdoc if you have like a team kind of setup. It depends on what you have. Another person may not work very well when they're micromanaged. They need a little bit more freedom, and maybe they can be trusted to have more freedom. So maybe somebody else needs more psychological support. Somebody else doesn't. I think that is one thing that I hadn't quite worked out early on in the process. I thought that, one formula would kind of work for everyone, and I had to, just make sure that I tell them what is expected. That doesn't work. I really had to go with each individual person, find out what their goals are. Maybe they want to be a PI. Maybe they don't. Maybe all they want is to get a master's. Maybe they want to get a PhD. Depending on what they want, you need to address their needs as an individual. Not only in academia, but in a way as a personality too. And I think these were kind of like the main things that I wanted to cover in terms of that. You can circle back to me if I didn't answer something.
No, it's a great answer. Thank you very much. And now I think we're gonna move to Dr. Pickney. I mean, you have a great lab in my department that I know of, so we'd like to hear from you now.
Sure. Yeah, so I think in terms of recruitment, I don't want to add too much more. I think for me, my most successful way of recruiting students has actually been through some kind of familiarity. So like teaching an undergraduate course or being part of the science college. So I've actually attracted a few very strong undergraduate students in as 490s, and then they have wanted to stay as graduate students. So that's relationship has worked really well for me as a recruitment tool. And similarly, even if somebody comes in as a master's, they might do the master's and then decide to stay for the PhD. So a lot of my students have come in and then decided to stay, which is great because you do get to know each other over that time, and you get this a relationship that works, right? And it's productive. I think in terms of the training style, I think I don't want to repeat a lot of what was just said because I think those are wonderful points. I think that open line of communication is super important so that you can learn what those individual styles are going to be and then how to tailor your training toward those different styles. And I think in the beginning, I used to get so, worked up or worried about different things and was I doing this properly, or how could I make this project move forward more quickly how could I train this person better? And over time, I've learned to step back a little bit and let them make a few mistakes. As long as those open lines of communication are there, you can support them and help them get through their projects. And as in the end, my students are all very successful in whatever they end up doing. And it's been a wonderful experience.
Yeah, we know that. We know that, actually. Thank you very much, Dr. Pickney. Now we would like to hear from Dr. Benali. Yeah, you're unmuted, Doctor.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of things has been said, and I just want to highlight a few of them from my own experience and this different experience between France and Montreal. First of all, I think that when you hire a student in your team, you should, of course, you have to define. I'm talking about the young researcher. You have to clearly define in which area those students are going to be involved. And it's not simply an idea. You need to have a clear program for them and a strong program for them. It doesn't mean that everything is going to work in the way that you have planned, but it needs to be really planned from at the beginning. That's very important. Second is that you need to link between your career, because if you hire the student is to develop part of your research program with you. This is for you. But at the same time, you have to think about what is their career, what they want. What is their project? Let's say we start with a master's student, and if this master's student wants to continue doing a PhD, this is something different from the master's student who want to go to the industry or want to come back home, because there are a lot of people who are not Canadian, or Canadian, they want to move from one area to another area. This is really very important to link between what is their project. In the way that it's like a contract, they should feel themselves part of a directional program that you can really share together. This is really this important aspect of human relationship, seems to me, from my experience, very, very important. The second point that I want to highlight is the fact that when you start building your lab, so you should start with, I would say, less difficulties to manage people. So less difficulties to manage people means that for the student, maybe 2 or 3 master's student is enough at the beginning to fix your research program. Then, if this is successful, so you can enlarge the your number of students with PhD, postdoc, etc. So I think that it's more difficult to move directly with PhD and postdoc, and particularly in PhD, because PhD in Montreal is 5 years. And as Christophe said before, I never hire a PhD from scratch. Even now, I almost the time take someone who worked with me for, let's say in France, it's more easy because they come at the lab for 6 months. Then after 6 months, you have a good idea how, if the subject is of interest for the student, if they are really, they want to work on it, or etc. So this is something maybe more easy in this side. But in my lab right now, I start hiring mostly master student after, roughly speaking, 35 years of research. I mean, I'm not a young guy, but I am young somehow at Concordia University with the strategy of Concordia University and with all the different way to manage a student in 2 different countries with 2 different constraints. But anyway, I start with the master student, and then I move a little bit with the PhD student, and my first postdoc is coming after 5 years working at Concordia University. Less than 5, but between 4 and 5. So again, I just want to say that you need to gradually increase the difficulties of managing the student, and mostly when you propose a research program, this research program should be in line of what the student need to do in the future. So this is mainly my main recommendation for the younger researcher.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ben Ali. Now we'd like to hear from Dr. Puig. Hello. Yeah, Dr. Puig.
Do you read my name or?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Am I saying it right? I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's a hard name. It's Boy. Yes.
Boy?
Yeah.
It's Boy.
Yeah,
Okay,
Boy. That's okay.
I'm really
That's okay.
sorry.
No worries about it. Yeah.
Sorry.
A lot of things already has been said, but I would like to add just because before I started at Concordia, I started my career as principal investigator as a research scientist at Saint-Justine, where I keep my affiliation. But I started as a research scientist there, which was a program that was affiliated with the graduate program in psychiatry at UDM. When I was hiring my first student, I think I've been extremely lucky with one thing that was, in my postdoc when I was at McGill, I had an excellent research assistant that I was able to bring with me actually when I started SPI, which actually really, I think, helped to really develop, my program. In terms of like supervision style, I mean, a lot of things have been said, like in terms of, I think over the years I've been micromanaging much less. But again, it's as well as what was said as well, it depends really on like the specific student you're dealing with, because some students, they just need a little bit more, guidance. I think like it's also when you start recruiting students, it's important for me. It was important to really, and it's actually every year when I start recruiting students, think about, okay, what are my needs actually in the students? So the type of work I'm doing in my lab, it's a combination of more clinical oriented research with more molecular work and more imaging. So I really always try to find a good balance with the students of the different, expertise that they have and the different interests. Also different programs. For example, my students who are in the clinical psychology program, they have, for instance, like a little less research time than say someone who is more like in a research oriented program. So I always try to find like the right balance in terms of what kind of students do I need for the program, for my research at the moment, and how, what's the best fit actually. Fit with the supervisor is very important, but for me, it's also really important that the students also really fit well together. So an important part of the recruitment process is as well that my students as well are interviewing the potential new students as well, because the nature of the projects I'm doing in my lab, people work a lot together. So I really want to make sure that there is a right fit, like in every, project. I think last what I'm going to add, like at Concordia, we also have like an undergraduate program, and we have a lot of good undergraduate students. So these are also, especially at the beginning, it's a very good pool actually to hire, like to recruit students who are doing volunteering or like a thesis project or a summer research project. And you can also get a lot of things done with undergraduate students and get things started.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Boish. Now I'm just going to head to our second question. It's actually kind of a short answer question, but it's very interesting. I mean, for all undergraduate and new graduate students, and probably we need to take notes for these answers. So the question is, in your experience, what makes a good lab coordinator or research assistant? So this question will be directed to Dr. Grova.
Okay, I won't answer that long on this one because I don't really, like, my lab is mainly organized through a postdoc, grad, and undergrad. So I don't have a research assistant per se in the lab. I started with at the very beginning, and that was not the best idea, I would say, at the very beginning, because it was too early.
Yeah.
That was my first recruitment with 2 master students, and that was not needed at that time. Now that I have a bigger lab, I am actually looking for one right now. But that was the main thing. So it's mainly project oriented. So one postdoc or one PhD is in charge of their own project. So that's the way they are doing. So I'll stop.
Right. It's actually, just to clarify, the question is like what you look for in any lab in any staff or lab personnel you hire for the lab. So I think this answers our question.
Yeah, and it depends the research as well, like the kind of research we're doing. There is stuff already in the imaging suite that when we book the system. So it depends on the research. So we need less probably.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Grova. Now we would like to hear from Dr. Yordanova.
Yeah, so I actually echo Dr. Grover's answer in the sense that depending on the lab that you have, you may not get a research coordinator or a lab manager. That may come later. I think bigger labs tend to have that. I'm now considering hiring someone like this. However, I think when you first hire, you really need to focus on getting data. And for some labs, maybe a lab manager or research coordinator can do that. But I struggle to see how really that will be the first point of hiring. I don't think it would be. I think students or a postdoc, if you have the money, could be a really good way to get off the ground quickly. Now, I do have research assistants, but the way that I do this is essentially I pay people to run experiments if they have proven to be really excellent. So they might start off as volunteers, and then I could promote them to paid work. These are the kind of research assistants that I have. Again, they're on the ground collecting data, building their own projects, and essentially potentially building their own name as a scientist. So what I look for is someone who can follow instruction, someone who can do exactly what they're asked to do, because they will not be developing their own studies at this point. They will be directly, running an experiment that has already been decided for them, which is very different to what one might do with a master's or a PhD student or a postdoc, where there's a lot more interaction in figuring out what the research question might be, what they're going to do, how you're going to design the study, etc., etc. So you had some other component. What makes right? Okay, so what would make a good lab manager? It's hard for me to know, but I imagine someone for me would be someone who can kind of help me liaise with the lab and oversee things, and essentially have good management skills, time management skills, so they can coordinate things in the lab and serve to support, everyone in the lab. So some of the things that we do, because we're a wet lab, is we have transgenic animals. Currently, the students have to take care of these animals in addition to running their studies. I think that's a really good skill to learn. But as you become a bigger lab with more money, it is also good to bring someone in who can support the team by taking care of these components, right? So it will be someone that I can rely on in terms of, more generally, the kind of people that I would hire would be people who are excited about the work that we do. So, you want your lab manager to be excited about the work that you do, but really ultimately the students that you hire and the postdocs, the trainees, need to be excited about the neurobiology of learning and memory, right? Or whatever question it is that you're investigating in your lab. And if they're not excited about that, if they don't have a goal, and they don't have to know what they're going to be in 10 years, but they need to have some sort of, long-term goal to help you figure out where they're going to fit within your environment. And I think that's quite helpful. If they come in not necessarily being very excited about what you do, that may not work out very well. That said, if you told me today that I can no longer study the neurobiology of learning and memory and I had to start studying the liver, I will be equally excited about doing that too, because ultimately I'm a researcher in my heart. So I think someone can come in and not know a lot about what you do, but they could be very excited about, just research in general. And that's also okay. But you need to ask the right questions to figure out whether, that excitement is there. And I think that's the main thing that I look for. Good work ethic, of course, but the only way to really know that is to have them start with you ahead of time. And I think a lot of people had mentioned this actually, that is their strategy. Have someone start in the lab in, either maybe through recruitment or through volunteering or whatever it might be, part of the science college when they're doing their rotations, to kind of get a sense for how it's going to work. And then you will have answers to those questions.
Right. Thank you very much. Now we'd like to hear from Dr. Pickney.
Okay, so I'll really focus my answer on the technician part, the staff. So in my field, it's actually quite common to have technicians. Again, we have just so many experiments that need to be done in terms of at the molecular and cellular level. That requires just an extensive amount of reagents, and we're constantly building new constructs, or things that might they're not necessarily the exciting work, the work that's really generating the data, but it's crucial to get us to that point. So a lot of us tend to do this. We also order an extraordinarily amount of stuff. So I have orders going out daily. So just to manage those orders and keep track of everything can be really hard. It's a lot of workload for me. When I first started my lab, I got a technician in right away to help me get my lab running. And, they were great in that sense. But they're not the same kind of person that I would need now that I have a massive lab, and the kind of management that they would need to do is quite different. So I think the way you choose your technicians and hire them is going to change depending on the need that you have. So in the beginning, I needed somebody who could just follow instruction, help me set up some of those cell molecular experiments. Now I need somebody who can do some more management kind of work, and I can trust to do that ordering, and I can trust to make sure reagents are getting replenished and experiments are being done properly, or even to assign them small experiments to do. But it's more to support those that are being done by the graduate students. And I have to say, it's hit or miss, hey? So it's really hard. You interview, you can get in somebody in an interview that seems wonderful, and then they come in and they're a disaster. So unfortunately, it's not the same as bringing in a student, right? So the hiring process is quite different. So yeah, that's all I'll say about that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pickney. And now we want to hear from Dr. Ben Ali.
Yes, I agree with my colleague. So I think that the lab technician, coordinator, or research assistant are hired to expand the research program with one or more collaborators and more students. That's usually the case. So these hires are not useful at the start or at the beginning of building the lab. I don't think so. So I think that a young research laboratory starts with 2-3 master students and maybe one PhD. And the young researcher need to manage this, need to know how we can manage the lab. When the lab becomes, so it means that we are more focused. It means that we are working more deeply on building the research program. When the research program is well established, we enlarge this. When we enlarge the collaboration, when we enlarge the research program, we need some help. So at this stage, it can be technician, which area, etc. That's need to be defined. It can be also a research assistant, because we need some help for the grant, we need some help managing the student, we need some help. But all what I want to say, all of this comes a little bit later. And this is not really at the starting of building the lab.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And now we'd like to hear from Dr. Boyge.
Yeah, in terms of having support in terms of research assistant and research coordinator, I started hiring actually a relatively junior research assistant relatively early to really give a hand with more overall administrative duties, and as well some data collection as well, and to really get things actually ongoing, like even if they were relatively simple tasks, but to really so that I could focus on other specific aspects of building of my lab. When my lab started to grow, I hired like a coordinator who was involved in more things, also for more hours. And I think the most important thing that I'm looking for in a research coordinator is the ability to multitask, because there are so many different things that I involve my research coordinator in, that it's just important that the person can handle multiple things at the same time. In addition to research coordinator, I think for more specific for this other research assistants, it really depends on the needs. Given that my research use like different type of techniques, for example, for certain projects, I have a technician for certain hours per week who's doing more the molecular stuff. Others, I also need a research assistant for clinical interviewing who needs to have then a certain clinical skills. So it really, for these specific things, it really depends on the needs of the project, what the specific, expertise is, and also the specific characteristics what I'm looking for.
Thank you very much. Now, finally, I think the last, we'd like to hear from Dr. Fortin.
Well, nothing much to add. I think that, as it's been said, it's really specific to your the type of research you're doing. For me specifically, I started looking lately to hire a research assistant to help with randomized control trial, but things are not really going right now because of the COVID situation. But when you have to come and have a human participant coming in, booking a series of appointments, filling out some questionnaire, I think that those are things that a research assistant in my case could be really helpful with doing screening to see if the participants are eligible for a specific study. So all of this could be research assistant that could help our study coordinators. So I'm looking into that now because I have a couple of projects where I could use the help. So those are just other ideas of where, when, and how you could use somebody like that in your lab. Yep.
Great. Thank you very much. These were great answers. Thank you, Dr. Fortin. And I think now we're just going to go to theme 3. Thank you very much for your valuable answers. And now Milad will take over.
Hello, everyone. My name is Milad Sultanzadeh, and I'm from EC department. I work under supervision of Dr. Ben Ali. So let's move to the theme. Importance of these tools through the ongoing pandemic, and they indeed help many business adapt to the new norm. So our first question in this team will be directed to Dr. Yordanova. An important part of research is sharing your ideas and achievements to be known and acknowledged by scientific community and public. How do you get your findings out in the public, for example, social media, scientific journalists, etc.? How has this helped develop your lab and career?
Well, all of us get our research out through scientific publications. So that's quite standard. Neuroscience is a really growing field. There are many, many publications out there. I think it can be hard to keep up with all the new discoveries. So people have taken to social media to share this information. I think that is a good idea because you do reach a lot of people, and essentially what people have been doing is communicating their research findings in a way that's very succinct. However, that should not under any circumstances take precedent or take away from reading the actual scientific paper at any level, whether you're a trainee or whether you're a PI. And very often papers can be shared when they're put on bioRxiv. I'm a big fan of bioRxiv, but that has not yet been peer reviewed. So, there's a lot of complexity that comes into social media, and personality plays into how successful you will be on social media. So we need to take that with a grain of salt, but it is a medium to put your work out there. A really good way to share your research is really scientific meetings. And one of the things that I have been doing since I started my own lab and once we got some data is I really committed to go into a number of different scientific meetings where I would reach out, I would reach different kind of audiences within science to communicate what we've been doing. So giving talks is a really great way to get people to know what you're doing. And I have also taken my trainees to give to present posters, and doing it, just doing one conference isn't enough. Many is a good idea. With the digital age, we'll be able to do that online, not having to travel as much. And we have to think about our carbon footprint. I think that's really important to me. So now that we can give talks on Zoom, I will say yes to just about any talk. Before that, I'd had to be more selective because I can only travel so much. So really speaking about your work not only gives people an opportunity to see a lot of what you've done, right? Because chances are when you give a 1 hour talk, you're not presenting a single paper. And you can show how excited you are about the research that you do. That will get other PIs to potentially be excited about it, to look you up, but also students at other institutions who might be looking for a postdoc or who are undergraduates looking for graduate school may get excited. So definitely talk a lot about the research that you do. That will probably be the number one thing that I would suggest doing. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. Now we would like to hear from Dr. Pickney about sharing research to the public or scientific community.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll admit I'm old school. So, I come from before the days of Twitter and, these social media platforms where things can really be advertised to a large community in a very rapid way. I had and still do have a website, but I find it extremely challenging to maintain that website. It requires constant attention and updating. And I think the challenge with social media is that you can get outdated very, very quickly, right? So you need to have that excitement constantly generated in that update. So you really need to have somebody dedicated to maintaining those social media platforms. So where I find it more helpful is in the context of centers. So I'm part of the Center for Applied Synthetic Biology, for example, or through the Center for Nanoscience Research. So they have their own social media platforms, and then they can highlight research that's coming out of the group, and they can actually have somebody dedicated to doing that. Same with the Science College, right, for those students and to advertise the work that they're doing. So having those students in our lab and then having that work advertised through those forums is a way that as a PI, we can get our work out there without us having to do that constant updating. I'm like the last comment, I also prefer to use meetings and conferences as my way of disseminating my work. I feel like it's the best way to get to the people that are in your community and to give them that the most up-to-date information about what you're doing at that time, right? So I'm very active. I send students always to conferences in my field, nationally and internationally, and I always have them present. And so I find that this is the most effective. I also post on bioRxiv. So this is something now that I'm doing more and more often. So I'm making preprints of all my publications before I send them on to the journals. And this is a way to ensure that there's global access to the work that you're doing, so anybody in the world can see it, they can have a chance to comment on it, and it can be reposted on Twitter feeds.
Great, thank you very much. So let's move to Dr. Ben Ali.
So thank you, Milad. I think that we have to distinguish between two types of communication. The first one is communication. What I mean communication from a researcher is publication, congress, and having a more specialized work that we share with our research network. And this is really very important because if I come back to the evaluation of the researcher, can be young or not, the main thing is what are your publications? What are your impact factor? Even if in the impact factor that there are few things coming from this large communication with the social media. And so from my point of view, when your research program is advanced, the research should be also disseminated to a wider audience via the media, in this case, maybe science journalists, social media, or TV. So we have a lot of researchers who comes now on the TV, and I see a lot of them doing some kind of publicity on them, which is fine. I mean, so this help that this kind of dissemination brings is in terms of making the non-expert aware of your research, and at the same time raising the awareness of decision makers to support your field of research. It can be from the university, or it can be from the politics. So this is very important for our community to help supporting our domain, our research. And but I think that my recommendation from a young researcher is to be, again, focused on publication on journals and congress of the specialty where they are. They need to be known, and they need to be recognized in this area. And this is, from my point of view, the only way to be recognized and to build the research program and to strengthen the research program and the labs at the same time.
Thanks a lot. So let's move to Dr. Bui to hear from her about this question.
In terms of social media, I mean, I think it's a good tool to distribute findings, but I think like people really differ how much they use it in terms of like how much they spread it around. In general, my main kind of way of disseminating is as well through publications, but also scientific meetings. To come back more in terms of scientific meetings, depends a bit on the nature of the research, but usually like it's always important to pick the right kind of scientific meeting. Sometimes it's also very valuable to maybe not always go to these, bigger conferences, but the smaller meetings are also sometimes like easier to network as well and to disseminate your findings. I also started, but this is quite recent, that from our clinical oriented research, also to connect with more partner organizations in the field, people with, dealing, let's say, more non-scientific organizations. For instance, in my field, for example, I work in eating disorders, connect as well with these more almost charity foundations to really who are there as well, let's say, for like people with lived experience and so on. So I really now try to connect as well a bit more outside the scientific community as well to disseminate my findings.
Thank you for your answer. And we would like to hear from Dr. Fortin next.
Yeah, my primary way as well is definitely by publication and conference. Just minor little thing to maybe to add is that, I think it's important that you pick definitely different conference, but also different audience. So in my case, I always go to a conference where it's more like a research community, but I can always go as well to meetings where it's more clinicians. Clinicians don't necessarily always have access to those publications. So there's definitely meetings where I go as well and reach out to the clinicians so they can also get the latest information as to, like, for example, the treatment that we use for low back pain or etc. So I think those are interesting thing to do to diversify the audience so you can have the bigger reach. And I think that conferences are definitely good time for networking. So if you go as a graduate student, I think that if you see a talk that's in your field, I always encourage the student to go and talk as well to make connections, because in research it's key. Then your network is definitely key. So if you can reach out, those are super great opportunities to go and talk at these meetings. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And yes, Dr. Yordanova.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. I don't think anybody was left. I just wanted to echo something that Dr. Pickney had said about bioRxiv. So by putting your papers out on bioRxiv, they can be accessed by anyone in the world. And I think that's really, really important. And another thing that I failed to say, or I didn't want to leave people with the wrong impression, although bioRxiv papers are pre-peer review, eLife actually will review some bioRxiv papers. So when you go to a bioRxiv paper, there may actually be peer-reviewed comments that have been posted along with like an editorial letter for bioRxiv. I'm currently handling one of those currently. So whether we're considering this as PIs or you are just, you were a student, a trainee in somebody's lab and your PI is not doing this, please, do a little bit of research and try and encourage them to do that. It really is good for many reasons. But one of the big ones is that anyone can then get access to your paper. Otherwise, you're limited by the subscription potentially that the university has. Also, sometimes high impact publications can take a really long time from submission to actually being published. For me, it took a year recently, but my paper was out on bioRxiv as soon as I had submitted it to the journal. So that means the work is out sooner, which I think is an important thing, because if somebody else is working on a similar question, then at least they can adjust what they're doing.
Great, thank you for adding this to your answer. So finally, we would like to hear from Dr. Grover.
Hello. Yeah, so I agree with everything that has been said. Some very point where through bioRxiv issue, I agree with what's been said. Again, like publication, peer-reviewed publications remains the most important. I'd like to make a note more on the side of someone also doing research, but also programming and putting new software available for our community, which is a bit different. So the methods that we want to propose should be, of course, validated, associated to peer-reviewed papers and so on. But it's also very important that both on the data side and on the software side that we have to live in more and more into this open science and open source. And open source is very important. And one of which is a social network in a way, a very famous way to do that for code is GitHub. And GitHub not only allows you to manage your code, but it allows to have several people working on your code at the same time. So it's a more community effort than the effort of one single person. And so the risk to have bugs or what are highly decreased. The quality of the result is better. And all the main software currently done in brain imaging are done like that. And as developers of new methods, we are working like that as well. We are putting plugins into well-known softwares. And I think that's an important way of, which is another way of seeing the social network. And yeah, and the work that's been done, and that's also a lot of social media, like on hackathon and things like that, in terms of coding and how to get all this available, has been very important.
Thank you very much. So our next question in this theme will be directed to Dr. Pickney, and it will be about collaboration in academia. We know some research centers at Concordia, such as the CSBN, where scientists collaborate with each other and with external researchers. Between training students, writing grants applications, and maintaining your lab prosper, the question is, how do you go about setting or organizing a collaborative research project?
Okay, so first I'd like to say that when you're really starting out your lab, I think this has been brought up earlier, it's so important for you to establish yourself and your identity. So what is your core research program going to be? And I think until you do that, I think collaborations should kind of be kept to a minimum, or perhaps there's some ongoing collaborations that you had already been participating in when you started up your lab. By all means, continue those. But I think it's really important to establish yourself as a lead investigator in a field. And so once you have done that, then I think you're in a good position to be collaborating. For me, it didn't happen for, I would say, a good 5 or 6 years until I was into my program. Now, now that I'm even further than that into my program, I'm very actively collaborating. But I have a large group. I can maintain my core research program that are run off my operating grants that are where I'm strictly PI. And then I have my other programs, which are running through collaborations and funded in various means, various means. And some of these are headed toward commercial sector and others are in academia. So I think, but it took time for me to be in a position where I was comfortable to do that. In terms of how to seek them out, I think they have to be natural. They have to occur because your research is aligning with somebody else. When people try to force it too much, it's on paper only. Those often don't work and they cannot be sustained. So I think it has to be where you really, you see that your research is really aligning with somebody else, you come together and it's a real synergy, and both of you have to be actively participating in that collaboration, because the second one person isn't, then it falls down. So you have to have resources dedicated to it in terms of finances and students, time, and I think that's the only way it can really truly be successful. So I think, and if you're considering commercial, I think that's something, again, I would encourage down the road. I think in engineering, maybe this would happen sooner than, say, in other discipline. But I think it's really important to, it's a whole new language, a whole new area that you have to navigate once you go into the private sector. It's very different than what we do in academia.
Great, thank you. Now we want to hear from Dr. Ben Ali. I know that you signify collaborations and it's important to you. So now we would like to hear from you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Elisa mentioned about before thinking about a large collaboration, we stay with strengthening the research program, making the research program homogeneous, and making this clear. So this is what we talk about, the lab of the young researcher. And then collaboration is important. I think it's very important. It can be first a collaboration where your research program is in the middle, in the heart of the collaboration. This is really something that you can start early. And if the collaboration makes your research program, allows your research program, this is something that you have to take carefully at the beginning, at least. So this is very important to have, but the collaborative research program or project are important. In structures such as you mentioned, the CSBN or the Perform Center. So we ask people to collaborate in those centers. So for example, at the Perform Center, we offer an environment where the psychologist or kinesiologist can work with engineer. This is something helpful when we are part of the a research center like the Perform Center. It's more easy, I would say. If it's more easy than the one who are hired in a department without link. Well, I mean, let's say hired at the psychology department and they need to have collaboration for their own research program with engineering. They should go to engineering, find the best way to collaborate with the people. If all of them are at the same, in the same environment, it can be CSBN, it can be Perform Center or other center at Concordia University. This is more easy because everybody is in the same roof. So everything is done in the same, so it's more easy to collaborate. So that has been said. I think that the collaboration with academia and you say outside academia, from my point of view, outside academia, they are mainly from industry. So my point of view is this is more translational research. So this translational research, it's also a collaboration, but it happens when your research program is successful, is well established. So you cannot start your research program doing this kind of translational research. It makes a lot of pressure just for the young researcher please take this into account. When you work with the industry, they are in a limited time. So they are going to push you too much. So in this case, you are going to lose completely your focus to answer their needs. And this is not what is expected from you. When you start your research program, you need to be focused first on your research program. So from my point of view, this translational research is something that it can be done a little bit later. I see that happening too much for a young researcher in the engineering side, because maybe engineering is a little bit special. It's less happening on other area like FIS faculty. But anyway, I think it's important to be aware of this problem and to manage this problem when you are a young researcher or young hiring researcher. And you ask about the pros and cons of collaboration with other researchers. I think that open-mindedness is the word that comes to my mind. So if we approach a collaboration in the spirit of sharing, my point of view, I only see advantages for that. So it's also an attitude. Collaboration is not simply, you give A, I give B. Yes, but it's also really to build something. It's I plus B, something more bigger than what we can do. But we need for that to be open-minded. If an engineer wants to collaborate with a psychologist, I need really to understand what is the problem of the psychologist. I need to be in their side, but I need to be confident. I move from one area where I am comfortable to an area where I'm not. But if I am confident with the other people, so I can try to understand, I can try to share the information, I can give them some knowledge, and I can also take from them knowledge to build a research program, this research, more bigger research program that we can do. So they are a risk in the collaboration somehow, but this risk should be taken in a way that there are advantages. From my point of view, there are almost the time advantages to have this collaboration. So that's why I'm mostly, when I start doing the collaboration, I really start with a very important spirit to share with the people. So this is very, very important to have in mind.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Grover, if you want to add.
Okay, so I can add to that. Yeah, I agree with what's been said. There are different levels of collaborations that are important. I think close level collaborations are quite important, especially at the beginning. And we have nice program, like some, I'm thinking of FRQNT Research Team program. You have nice funding program for that in Quebec or in Canada. And so that can really help you to set up with, but these are not 40, 50 people. These are 2 or 3 people that you are really working with and that you have been working. For me, most of those persons, I was already working with them as a postdoc or before, and I still continue working with them. And those are very important, I think, at the beginning, because I can help you. They can provide advice and help you setting up your program and making sure. Try to keep in mind that you have to show your productivity in terms of publication, in terms of, and being involved in so many different collaborative projects, having your name in the middle of so many publications doesn't help at the beginning, because you have to show as what's going on. And so that's what I would have said. Yes, I agree that perhaps when you are later, those larger collaboration or collaboration with industry makes sense. But at the beginning, it's more, what are those who are most important for you to make your program being efficient. And for me, one of the key aspects was to pair my program with a clinician, especially for my work in epilepsy. That was critical.
Great, thank you very much. So next, we want to hear from Dr. Boy.
Yeah, to add into that, actually I think throughout the course of my career so far, I think the number and the level of collaborations has been increased. Overall, I see as well different levels of collaborations with some of the people I collaborate with. That is because there's a very specific expertise that I would need for my research program that in-house cannot be found. For example, for clinical research, I also collaborate with clinicians who don't do really a lot of research, but they have this very valuable aspect as well that I really also would need for my research program. A more closer collaboration could even be, although I started to only do that a bit later in my career, to really run with another person, a specific project as COPI, for example. So it really depends on the level of collaboration. I think there could be various levels, and I think they're all really very good for the further development of my research program. But I agree that in the beginning it might be good as well, maybe to also to make sure that you establish independency as well, to really start small, and then later on you have the time later to develop these more bigger projects, co-PIing on certain projects and large multi-site studies.
Thank you so much. So next we would like to hear from Dr. Fortin.
Yeah, I did 2 postdocs, 2 in Montreal, one at McGill and one at Perform. So those provided me really good opportunity to network and maintain, collaboration that I already had in place when I started my faculty position. For me, something that happened, I was kind of exposed to collaboration right from the beginning when I did my PhD. Because as part of my PhD, when I got my position, my supervisor was working with a European consortium. So it was a very interesting experience. I moved to Edmonton where I did my PhD, and in August and in September, I was in Slovenia with 9 different countries where they were meeting, and they were getting imaging from 2,400 patients, and I was managing those images. I was doing the analysis. So right away I was exposed to that and understood the importance of collaboration and maintain that relationship and talk and everything. So, and I still do work with these people now. I think, it's key to, I understand the other points that were you don't want to start too big, but if you have good relationship from the beginning, I encourage to maintain those collaboration, because you never know where things will go. And that large database of 2,400 MRs that we collected, I still use today. So those are very valuable resources that you can, if you ever have some opportunity. So, and I still do collaborate now with my PhD supervisor and my postdoc supervisor. It's a key balance when you start your own lab, because, for example, when you apply for grants and everything, they want to see that you're independent and you're not just always working with your PhD supervisor or postdoc supervisor. But the reality is that, some of the data you collected throughout your postdoc, is part of their lab, but you could still have additional questions that you want to ask afterwards. So it's a key balance, I think, to show your independence. But if you have good relationship with your previous mentor, I encourage you to maintain those. And I think that collaboration as well is definitely key to try to merge different expertise, so you can strengthen their program, so you can do multidisciplinary kind of project. And that's also what they want to see a lot of time when you're applying for a grant. So if you're applying for a grant and you're able to show that, you have a good network, and everybody in your grant is not just there to put their name on the grant, but is there because they have a specific role and they bring it to your team, then I think that's key. And it shows that you have a strong network and a good program.
Thank you so much. And finally, Dr. Yordanova, if you want to add something.
I don't have much to add. I think all my colleagues have covered this really well. I guess the only thing that I would emphasize that I think collaborations really truly should be natural. Don't force them, like Alisa mentioned. And also, very often they're not necessarily led by the PI, but students can see for potential links between different labs within an institution, or even beyond your individual institution by going to talks or going to conferences, and they can actually spearhead those and they can work out quite well. This was really the only thing that I had to add.
Thank you all for your valuable answers. And now my friend Dipanita will do the rest.
So, hi everyone. Before Dipanita begins, I just wanted to say that we are pretty much close to the end. We're running a little bit over time, so if you do have to leave right at noon, I do understand. We've boiled down our final theme to one question, so we'll move as quickly as we can, but if you do have to go, I understand. So that being said, Dipanita, take it away.
Hi, my name is Dipanita, and I'm a graduate student in Dr. Darlington's lab in HCAP. So the last theme is about something many students think about before considering a career in the field of academia, and it's about work-life balance. So our first question in this theme will be asked to Dr. Benali. Considering the demands of time and energy required for a career in academia, how do you make time for both yourself and your significant others? In other words, how do you maintain the boundary between your personal life and your professional life? For example, do you limit yourself to a 40-hour work week, or do you set your limits to not overwork? As a follow-up, was this difficult at first and it's become easier over time?
Thank you for this question. So it's a very difficult question because when I look to my life, I did a lot of mistake managing between my career and my research. So I try to summarize what are the lessons that I can bring the young researcher. I think that if you want to become a researcher, you have to be particularly well organized. This is very important. You need to be rigorous and know how to work quickly because you haven't a lot of time, really. So optimizing this is helpful to define the workload, pushes the researcher to not disconnect. So that's a big problem. So I cannot say that I start doing my research in the lab, then I go home at 5, 6, or 7. In Paris, it was a little bit late, but anyway, it's so. And when I come home, I simply disconnect from the research program. I'm still in the problem that we have. I'm still there. So it takes a kind of effort to disconnect from the lab. But likely the family is here to remind us that there is more to life than research. So it's almost the time a balance between, oh, I am completely in my idea of the research program, and the family say, oh, we are here. And the kids say, oh, we are also here. And this is very important to manage. So this problem is all the more true at the beginning of the career, but not only, because when one advances in the career, there are layers of administrative management of the research which comes to be added to it. So I think that people who say that at the beginning it's difficult, but later I becomes so I know more about how I manage the research program. This is not true. The university is there, and the institution are there, and the international collaboration is there to add to you some layers and to make heavy the management of the research. So people like doing this. A lot of researchers like having this kind of power. Lesson number one, it's not the power. It's taking time to your family. So power is managing all what you can do from the research point of view and take time to make your family more in a more comfortable environment. So because you are part of this structures of the family, this is really something that you have to manage. So a researcher must always be vigilant, never to privilege his research to the family balance. So this is really something that we should have in mind at every time. So it's a difficult balance that I have always been looking at for at least 30 years now. And but it's something that we can really manage. This is my last thinking, that we can manage between doing a best research and the strong research, and also having a very quiet and comfortable environment with our family. So never take the problem from the labs at home. That's something you should cut. When you leave the lab, you leave also the problem of the lab. And when you go home, you leave at home, and vice versa, because it's sometimes you have, as anybody, you can have some problem in the family side. So don't bring the problem of the family side to the lab, because it's really something difficult to manage. And so you should maintain the two environments as independent as possible.
Thank you so much. That's great advice. So now we'd like to hear from Dr. Boyge.
Yeah, well, I think like in general, to kind of organize work-life balance, it's important to stay organized. I think that's a key part. I think also an important aspect is I think like being like in a researcher, and that maybe distinguishes it from certain other types of jobs, is that the work is never finished. So, and I think also it's important, especially like in the early stages of the career, to accept that. So, like work-life balance is very important. It's also, I think, contributes to your productivity as a whole, to sometimes disconnect and not be always like always like in basically mentally as well in your lab and in the research. So to really make the time to disconnect, and also to accept that the work is rarely finished or almost never finished.
That's great. So now moving on, we'd like to hear from Dr. Fortin.
Yeah, I think that, as my colleagues have said, it's very important to set your priority right away at the beginning. One thing that we didn't really talk about today, we talked a lot about research, but one of the challenges that I faced, when I started on this path as a faculty member last year, was the teaching component. The teaching also, for me, took a lot of time at the beginning, to get some course set up. So to balance everything is definitely a challenge, but the reality is that you're always going to have some deadline. There's always going to be one that's going to come one after the other. So it doesn't stop, but it's, to be able to set your priority, and then really to be able to disconnect at some point when you come home, and when you spend time with your loved one and your kids, to be able to be focused in the moment, because it's just too easy to keep your head in the work. So try to find something that really takes your head away from work, which is, if it's sports or anything. But I think it's very key to keep everything balanced, because if you just put all your energy in one thing, then the other thing is going to start to fall down. And it's definitely, you need your support system definitely in place when you do this work.
Thank you very much for your answer. So moving forward, we'd like to hear from Dr. Grova.
Hello. I won't be very long because we're going to start an experiment soon, so I'll have to go. So I haven't heard exactly. I heard a little bit of what's been said, but yeah, basically I agree with what Maryse was saying, and I did mistake at the beginning, like not trying to find a good balance. To me, what really forced me to have the good balance is when I started having kids, because there were no other choice, I would say, and that was very good actually. So for me, I'm working a lot, like the important thing I'm doing them relatively early in the morning, like before kids wake up usually, and that's really, but trying to manage the different things is kind of difficult. I agree that we need to do several things. I'm also trying to have some of a career of a musician on the side, so I'm trying to have something else on top of that. So yeah, that's very important for your mental, for your equilibrium, and the family is very important for sure. So trying to find, of course, there are deadlines, there are periods. Like I told my family, like before CHR, you probably will forget a bit me, but then I'll come back. So
thank you very much for your answer. So we'd like to now hear from Dr. Aridanova.
Yeah, so I find this question really difficult to answer. If I was to answer it really honestly, I think if you want to be successful in academia, you have to, well, firstly, if you want to be successful in academia, and if you do like to be a scientist, you live and breathe this work. You don't go home shutting off and not thinking about it. You go for a run, you're thinking about it. You know, you're playing with your kids. Unfortunately, you're thinking about it, which isn't a good thing. So, you know, working hard is really fundamental to success. If you think that you can do this by working 9 to 5, I don't think you can. I mean, maybe you're particularly efficient and really good at it, but the majority of people can't do that. So I guess one advice I would give is whatever it is that you need to do, engage with the activity that you're doing. If you are deciding to spend time with your kids now, then be with your kids, right? Just focus on what you have in front of you. I think that can be really helpful, and that can give you a little bit of a break. I actually found it really difficult once I had kids. I had no problem doing the work 24/7 when I was a postdoc and a PhD student. It really didn't, like, I didn't find it difficult. I didn't feel that I was really overworked. Although you can notice the signs of being overworked and deal with it, you have to get to know yourself. I think that's really fundamental. You know who you are. You know if you're feeling good or if you're feeling like you're struggling. You know what kind of things might make you cope better, and if you don't, then speak to someone about it who can help you figure out what that may be for you. When I had kids, I found the enterprise of doing research and having kids incredibly overwhelming, because they were just, everybody needed me 100%. So that was really tricky. Disconnecting from my work didn't make it better. In a way, it made it worse, because I would be more anxious about the things that I hadn't done. The only thing that makes me feel better is getting what I need to do, getting it done. And maybe really the way to manage that is to know what to say yes to and what, you know, not to say yes to. And it could be hard if you're a researcher who loves doing what you're doing. You want to say yes to everything, irrespective of what level of training you're at. And maybe that is where you can kind of bring in a little bit of work-life balance. And, you know, ultimately, you know, I'll just, you know, kind of say it again and then stop here, is you have to look to yourself and know if you're feeling overworked or if it's too much. And I think that will help you figure out how things are going for you. But beyond that, I'm not really sure, you know, if there's like one particular answer that could work for everyone. I don't think that really holds true.
Thank you very much for your answer. And finally, we'd like to hear from Dr. Pickney.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I fully agree. I struggled with this one as well. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of, the system's not well set up to support a single parent, for example. The resources just simply aren't there. They don't exist. There's no adjustments to workloads that are made when that happens. And we still have to be extremely competitive when we apply for funding, and which means that we have to constantly be publishing, right? And trying to achieve that impactful sort of dissemination. And to do that with a colleague that doesn't have those same challenges is very hard to do. And I would argue that looking at success rates of our grants, it's not working. So the system needs to change. And I would hope that as the young people come into the system, maybe that's something that we can do, is try to get this shift away, find ways that we can support different kinds of diversity within research. And I mean diversity by not just people with kids, but other kinds of things that may impact their ability to do things in a strictly traditional way. So I'm hoping that this is going to change. But right now the system is just, it's unfortunately, it's a feedback, right? So we're in the system, we have to meet these directives in order to get our funding to keep our research programs going, at the same time with managing these massive teaching workloads and other service components. So it really is a challenge, and I don't I don't think any of us do it well, I suspect. But I live and breathe, and I call my lab my first child, by the way, because, you know, you nurture, you grow, and you want to support that, right? Just like you would a child. And then when you have your real children, you understand the differences, but at the same time, you don't want to just let that go, right? So I agree with the assessment of live and breathe your work. We do that. So, but yeah, and I don't have an answer for how to find the balance, I'll be honest. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your answers. That was really insightful. I'm going to pass it on to Oren now for concluding remarks.
Hi, before I go, Dr. Yordanova, you had your hand up for a moment.
Oh, yeah, I did. Sorry. I just wanted to mention one other thing. So part of living and breathing your research is that we also identify with our work. And if you are able to try to identify less with your work, that can actually be a really good way to achieve work-life balance. Because if you identify with what you do, every time you're being knocked down through a rejection of your paper, rejection of your grant, or whatever it might be, then you feel that this is a personal attack on who you are. And if you're able to separate the two, then actually it won't affect you as negatively. I know it can be difficult to do, but they're very fundamentally different things. Enjoying your work and, you know, like basically it being part of what you do every day and you think about it all the time, but not identifying with it as an individual can really just, I think it will naturally separate the two, and you won't run into this difficulty of knowing where one begins and what ends. Like you take the positive that comes with loving what you do without the negatives of, you know, if it doesn't work out as well, it's not an affront to your person.
Very, very good point to add. Thank you. So with all that being said, we've kind of reached the end of our workshop event. It's been a wonderful and very enlightening experience, and I want to send my great thanks to our faculty panelists, the committee members, including Clyde, who we didn't actually mention now, but he's been working in the background to organize questions that came in. We did receive a good number of questions, and some of them were actually answered throughout. We've kind of run out of time, so we don't really have the opportunity to ask anything else. But if you do have a burning question still, you're welcome to send an email to Wendy Cunin at the Perform Center. We are planning possibly some kind of message board setup. At the moment, it's in development, but if you have a question, you can email her for now. So the fact that we did have so many other questions is very telling to think about how complex of a process it can be to start a lab in academia. And I hope that our audience members benefited from this discussion and are going to walk away with some new knowledge and advice that they can take with them going forward. So this is the first event that our Student Scientific Event Subcommittee has made, and we do hope to have more in the future. So if you enjoyed this event, I hope that you will consider joining again for the next one. Also, just as some final notes, so as this session was recorded, at some point it will be posted on the Perform Center website for later viewing. And also, we were hoping to get some feedback about this event from the audience members. So at some point soon, we hope to send a short follow-up survey to anyone who's willing to answer, just to give us some feedback or reactions about this event that we would use to help develop the next event. So with that said, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day and semester. Stay safe, and hopefully we see you again soon. Thank you again to all of our panelists and to our committee members and to all of the audience members who stuck around for the whole thing.
So thank you all. Thank you very much for this, for the organizing the panel and for organizing this discussion. I think it's very helpful for the young and the non-young researcher, and having all your opinion is very helpful to bring a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.